Hello, in this video we're gonna create a NTP server for our Cisco UC environment. So in this whole lab exercises I'll be using VMware Workstation 16, and so in order to install any Cisco UC applications you need to have an NTP server in place, and especially when you install the publisher nodes it will always ask for an NTP server so they can stay up to date with the time differences. Alright, so the first things first, so you need to create a new virtual machine to install your operating system for your NTP server. So in this example I'll be using Ubuntu server edition to install the NTP server. So I will create a new virtual machine by clicking on create new virtual machine. So you have multiple options here. One is typical and the other one is custom, but due to some known issues with the Ubuntu server edition, I'll be selecting custom edition, and from there click next, and then it will give you an option to select the hardware compatibility. For hardware compatibility you need to select VMware Workstation 15. It's a known thing, honestly. I mean, there are some kernel issues with the new VMware Workstation release, which is Workstation 16 and Ubuntu 20.0.4 edition. So I'm setting it up to VMware Workstation 15. So click on next. If you have the ISO file with you, you can mount it. It works seamlessly for Windows installation, but I have come across some issues related to Ubuntu. So what I'll do, I will not mount any installer disk here. I will simply create the I will select this option. I will install the operating system later, so it will not look for the ISO file. So click next. So there are multiple options here, and so I'll be installing Linux, and under Linux I have like different types of Linux versions which are supported by VMware Workstation, and I'll be looking at Ubuntu 64-bit. So you can see there are two Ubuntu releases. So in our case it's a 64-bit operating system, so I will select Ubuntu 64-bit and click on next. Alright, so next you need to define a name for your virtual machine. So I'll call it as NTP server, and then you need to create a folder to save your virtual machine files. So I'll select this partition and I'll create a new folder there and click OK. So I have NTP server folder created for that, and click next. So it's asking for like number of processors, so I'm gonna leave the default value here. Click next. And regarding the virtual machines, 2 GB is more than sufficient for this installation, so I'm gonna set to 2 GB. Click next. The network type, so my virtual machine needs to communicate with outside network, so I have already create the bridging network with my network interface, so I'll be selecting use bridge network. Alright, click next. So these values I'm gonna leave default, so these are well-known values related to Ubuntu, so I'll just leave it like that. So you can see there are recommended values which is already given by VMware Workstation as per the operating system that you have selected. Click next. So in this screen it is giving you an option to select a hard disk. So this is a new virtual machine, so I don't have any existing hard disks, so I'll say create a new virtual disk. Click next. For the size of that specific disk, I'm gonna leave it the default value 20 GB. It's a large value in my view, but still, since all these disk images are provisioned as thin provision disks, that means they will not consume the exact amount at the time of the creation, and it will consume this space with the time, little by little, as the hard disk file grows. So I'll leave it as maximum 20 gig. Click next. So this is the name of the VMDK file. So the VMDK file is the actual hard disk file. Alright, I think of it like if you remove your hard drive out of your machine, Yeah, this is this file in the virtual machine world. So click next, and so we have everything. And if you want to modify anything related to your hardware, this is the place we're supposed to do that. So you click on the customize hardware and you set the ISO file that you want to install. So my ISO file is in the NFS share partition. So let me look for my ISO file. Okay, so I have the file in place. Click close. So I'm gonna click on finish button to finish this wizard. After this, yeah, you can see on the left side this library menu. You can see the NTP server available. So you click on the power on this virtual machine to start this VM, and I'll close this. So now you can see it is booting from the Ubuntu ISO file. So it will validate few things related to your hardware configurations of the VM. So if you are finding any kernel panic errors at this stage, that means you have configured something wrong, especially around the VMware compatibility, or else something to do with the your CPU and RAM. Yeah, it is booting up. Right, so now we have to select now basically we're gonna proceed with the installation of the Ubuntu release. So I'm gonna select the language as English. So basically it identified my keyboard and etc. So done. So interface that I connected, I don't have a DHCP server running, so probably it will complain that it cannot allocate an IP address, which is fine. So I'm gonna go ahead without the network, and I don't have any proxy server configured as well. So basically it's trying to get the required files. It is giving me an option to select this archive. It's fine. Okay, it is looking for an alternative or the updated version of the installer. I don't want to update anything, so I'll go like that. The next option is to partition the hard drive. I'm gonna use the whole 20 GB. Click done. It's a destructive action. Yes, I know. Alright, so I have to create an account. So I'll say Ravindra. My name is going to be NTP server. Username, I'll call it Ravindra again. Password. Alright, click done. So since I'm planning to manage this server using SSH, so I'm gonna install OpenSSH server as part of this installation wizard. So I will just select this option by pressing on the spacebar and click done. Alright, so now it is proceeding with the installation. So I'm gonna pause the video for a bit. I'll be back once it's completed the installation. So now the VM seems to be installed properly. So I'm gonna reboot the OS. So now it is going through the reboot process. You just press enter to remove the ISO file. Yeah, so now it is booting from the operating system. Alright, so let's try to log in with our account. Yeah, I think I set it as Ravindra. Yeah, so now I have logged in. We haven't specified an IP address, so if I type IP address, it doesn't have an IP configured. So I think our first activity needs to be to set up an IP address. Alright, so host name seems to be properly set, and so the next thing we need to configure is the IP address. So I'm gonna type sudo su, so I don't have to type sudo in front of every command. So the next thing which I need to update is the YAML file for the interface. So it should be netplan. Yeah, this should be the interface. Yeah, so I'm gonna edit this file to specify the IP address. So and space, so I'm gonna define the IP address now, 192.168.30. And next we need to specify the gateway, and the gateway should be 60.1, and I'm gonna configure name servers, and I will have multiple IPs. I guess the spelling is correct. Addresses, oh yeah, and the IPs that I need to specify, 192.168.1, comma, and I will use this global DNS server. And let's try to save the config, and let's try to apply the IP address. Oh, it went through. IP address, you can see the IP that I just added. So now let's try to ping the gateway. Yep, it is working fine. So now let's do a quick upgrade of the Ubuntu. So I'll type apt-get update. It should refresh all the repositories and etc. So it shouldn't take much time. Yeah, so now it's upgraded. So next thing we're gonna do, we are going to install the NTP server. And yeah, so now the NTP is properly configured, and by default the Ubuntu NTP config comes with some default NTP server, so you don't have to update any of that. Just make sure that the NTP service is up and running. Yeah, it seems to be up and running. So there are ways to verify this NTP server before putting it on any UC application. So for verification purposes, I'm using this tool from this website called bytefusion.com. They have this free product called NTP query tool, which is a very effective one. So I just installed that here. It's a simple application, so I'll just open it up, and I will specify the IP address what I'm typing, 198.60.30. So let's check whether I'm receiving any okay, it doesn't give us the response. Okay, timed out. Let's double check the situation. Next, what happened here? I will just try to restart it, and should be up again. Let's try this tool one more time. Yeah, now you can see it responded back. So this is the response from the NTP server. So right now we have a fully functional NTP server up and running. So let's move on for the next video. Thank you for watching.